Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today in fierce opposition to Bill 12, a bill so sprawling and so cynical, so cruel, it can only be understood as what it truly is, a blueprint for abandonment of reasonable responsibility. This bill is deliberate harm dressed up in legalese language, AISH to ADAP. Really, it should be called cruelty by design. The attack on Albertans with disabilities, I mean, who does that? Who attacks vulnerable citizens? I'll tell you who. This government. The UCP is trying to save money on the backs of people who already live in poverty. It's utter and pure disgrace. Under Bill 12, they're replacing assured income for the severely handicapped AISH with a new program called ADAP. The cuts to disability income is $200 a month, from $1,901 to $1,701. That is over $2,400 a year stolen from people who already cannot afford groceries, rent, medicine, basic dignity. And imagine, this comes after the UCP already clawed back the federal $200 Canada disability benefit. This government took federal money meant to help disabled Albertans and pocketed it. That's not fiscal responsibility in my books, that's theft. Madam Chair, I spent many years as a young woman working in many different organizations in Calgary and rural communities, supporting folks with dual diagnoses, persons with cognitive and developmental disabilities. And let me tell you, Madam Chair, this makes me sick. It is vile. It is beyond cruel. These are folks who already face stereotypes, sometimes abandonment from their families because of their disabilities. Some have speech impediments. Some have walking challenges. And we expect these people to pull up their bootstraps and get a job. It's disgusting. It's deplorable. And you know what, Madam Chair? In my family, we look after children and adults with disabilities and special needs. We make sure there are supports and accommodations when necessary. I don't know what kind of values this government was raised with, but this bill demonstrates certainly not grace. Madam Chair, this is happening during a time when the cost of living crisis, with the highest inflation, the fastest growing rents, the highest auto insurance in the country, and yet this government finds money to give themselves a raise. And we're going to force our vulnerable citizens. Let me remind you again what it means to be vulnerable. Some of these folks are in wheelchairs, some are homebound, some are on feeding tubes, some have cognitive delays, some have senior citizens as caregivers, their parents. And we have the audacity to expect and assign reassessments, reapplications, barrier on top of barrier. It's ridiculous. Bill 12 forces every single AISH recipient to be automatically transferred to ADAP in July of 2026, unless they beg for an exemption. I'm going to reiterate, our citizens with disabilities are going to be forced to be reassessed, reapply, and they're going to spend what little money they have on getting transportation to a doctor, if they can even see a doctor. They have to live with this uncertainty. And the definition of eligibility in this bill goes from weaker to, quote, permanently prevents employment, quote, to, quote, substantially impedes employment, quote. The softer the language, the easier it makes for the UCP government to deny people, to downgrade them, cut their supports. This UCP cabinet will be able to set benefit levels in regulation, meaning they can cut supports without even coming back to this place and space and talk about it. And an appeals process? There is none. And in some cases, imagine the UCP cabinet can exempt decisions from being appealed at all. So disabled Albertans lose their income and their rights. It's disturbing. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. Stakeholders have spoken and are being ignored. Disability leaders from across our province, including the Premier's very own advisory council. They signed an open letter saying this is costly, chaotic, and destined to push people over poverty. Inclusion Alberta says this will thrust thousands of people with disabilities into deeper poverty. MS Canada has warned these reforms threaten the stability of thousands of Albertans. And advocates are telling us that some disabled Albertans are considering medically assistance of dying because they feel abandoned by their own government. I have read emails, answered phone calls, gone for coffee, where people weep and cry out of desperation, where they've had to surrender their pets because they can't afford the only companion that loves them unconditionally. It is disgusting. Madam Chair, I don't know how to say this in parliamentary language, except it is utterly a complete moral collapse. Bill 12 has other failures embedded at AIMCO. The legal immunity for billion-dollar failures. Now let's talk about AIMCO. You know, back in 2019, this government forced billions of dollars to public pension money into AIMCO against the will of Albertans. The plan members said no. UCP government went ahead and did it anyways. They lost over $2 billion. And now, instead of accountability, Bill 12 gives AIMCO and this UCP government crown immunity. It blocks pension plans, including LAPP, PSPP, and SFPP, from recovering $1.3 billion that they are trying to reclaim. This bill doesn't protect workers. It protects politicians and their friends. Alberta pensions holders pay the price while this government rewrites the law to rewrite all accountability. This immunity extends to former directors and officers of AIMCO. People who have already left cannot be sued. They cannot be held account. This is conservative governance. The new governance is actually, know what it is? Authoritarian financial shielding. While people with disabilities are being cut by $200 a month, this bill quietly gives Cabinet the power to pay parliamentary secretaries new allowance. Lord knows we needed more parliamentary secretaries in this building. This is a reward system. The Premier has given nearly every caucus member a title to manage the unrest she's created, and now this Premier will pay extra for loyalty. After this bill passes, only 5 will not receive extra money because based on they'll have regular MLA pay. So while Albertans lose income, disabled Albertans lose income, while pensioners lose their protections, while families struggle with rent, this government gives itself a raise. What kind of government does that? I'll tell you, this UCP government does that. Bill 12 also creates legal shields for corporations who make or don't make climate disclosures. This is about protecting oil and gas companies and investors from lawsuits, not protecting the public, not protecting the land, not protecting the waters. After complaints were filed about misleading net zero claims, this government chooses not transparency, but corporate immunity. This bill expands liability backstops for the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation without meaningful consent, without transparent partnership, and without true respect for Indigenous sovereignty. Economic participation cannot be forced through crowd-controlled mechanisms while stripping us away from real decision-making power. This bill has one line about the government of Alberta protecting investors. You know, kind of like how we're protecting Australian investors with the coal mines, there is no mention of protection for Indigenous communities, no mention of protection of the environment, no mention of protection of the water. If these projects fail, what are the protections for anybody? We don't know, because Bill 12 makes an amendment with no mention of Indigenous peoples, just the Opportunities Act. You know, the Money Mart clause. Treaty rights are not for sale. I'll tell you what, Bill 12, the Fiscal Statutes Amendment Act, it cuts disabled people, and it's legal immunity for billion-dollar failures, politicians paying themselves more. It's really failure after failure after failure. The UCP is the most irresponsible government Alberta has ever seen. All I have witnessed in this gallery is cuts, chaos, corruption, and cruelty, and this bill is all of those things. Gitchimanatu, my God, I pray for those who are struggling, because Lord knows this bill will only deepen the wound and the burden for people with disabilities, the pension holders, the workers, Indigenous communities, while giving carte blanche of damage and destruction to Alberta's ecosystems, Alberta's biodiversity, and our sacred waters. You know what, Madam Chair? All Albertans deserve dignity. Our citizens with special needs deserve to be loved. They deserve to feel protected, not cruel punishment because they have disabilities. Bill 12 is an insult. I vote against it loudly and clearly on behalf of the land, on behalf of the water, and on behalf of the people this government has chosen to abandon. Hi, Nanaskaman, Madam Chair.